In the heart of Lagos, where glass towers touch the clouds and luxury cars line the streets like jewels, there stood a mansion that many admired but few truly understood. This is the home of Adeleke Okonkwo, a 32-year-old billionaire whose success story had inspired millions across Africa. But on this particular evening, something was about to happen that would shake the very foundation of everything he believed in. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share to anyone that needs to hear this story. And don't forget to check the description of this video to grab the copy of my ebooks to support this channel growth. The start of the story. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Inside this palace of wealth and privilege, the staff moved quietly through marble hallways. But there was something different in the air today. A tension, a fear that seemed to whisper through the corridors like an unwelcome ghost. 23-year-old Blessing, one of the housemaids, burst through the servants' entrance, her uniform disheveled, her eyes wide with terror. She had witnessed something that would haunt her for years to come. Something that should never happen in a place that called itself a home. Behind the mahogany doors of the West Wing guest room, sounds echoed that didn't belong in a place of such beauty. The dull thud of flesh against flesh, the weak, trembling voice of an elderly woman pleading for mercy, and the cold, calculated fury of someone who had forgotten what it meant to be human. Please, don't hit me again. They say that every family has secrets, but some secrets are so dark, so devastating, that when they finally come to light, they change everything. This is one of those stories. Adeleke wasn't supposed to be home today. His private jet had landed 3 hours early from a business meeting in Dubai. He had wanted to surprise his wife, to see the smile on her face when he walked through the door with the diamond bracelet he'd bought her in the gold souk. But fate had other plans. In his tailored Tom Ford suit and Italian leather shoes, he looked every inch the success story the magazines wrote about. The boy from Ajegunle who had built a tech empire before his 30th birthday. The philanthropist who had funded schools across West Africa. The son who had never forgotten where he came from. But when Blessing grabbed his arm at the entrance, her face streaked with tears, something in his chest tightened with a fear he hadn't felt since he was a child. He didn't need words. The terror in her eyes told him everything. He broke into a run, his designer shoes echoing against the marble floors, his heart pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound in the world. And then he saw it. The scene that would replay in his nightmares for months to come. His mother, Mama Yetunde, 72 years old, small and fragile, lying on the Persian rug, blood trickling from a cut above her eye, and standing over her, breathing hard, was the woman he had married 6 months ago. The woman he had called the love of his life. They say love makes you blind. But sometimes, when you finally open your eyes, what you see can break your heart into pieces so small, you wonder if they'll ever fit back together again. In that moment, time stopped. Every success, every achievement, every accolade he'd ever received meant nothing. Because the two most important women in his life stood before him, and one had just shattered everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and family. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Back to 6 months earlier, when the fairy tale first began. Or at least, when everyone thought it was a fairy tale. The wedding had been the social event of the season. 500 guests, a cathedral ceremony, a reception at the most exclusive hotel in Victoria Island. Everyone said they were the perfect couple. Young, beautiful, successful. Amara Choku, 28 years old. A marketing executive with a smile that could light up any room. She was elegant, educated, sophisticated. Everything a successful man could want in a wife. Or so everyone thought. But here's what the cameras didn't capture. What the wedding guests didn't see. What Adeleke himself was too enchanted to notice. Behind those beautiful eyes lived something darker. A jealousy so consuming, an insecurity so deep, that it would eventually poison everything it touched. The question everyone would ask later was simple. How did it come to this? How does love turn into hatred? How does a celebration turn into a crime scene? And most importantly, what happens when the masks we wear finally slip away, revealing the truth we've been hiding all along? If you believe that no mother, no elderly person, no human being deserves to be treated with such cruelty, then stay with this story. Because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about justice, forgiveness, and the true meaning of strength. Let's rewind to where the seeds of destruction were first planted. It was a Saturday morning, 3 days after the honeymoon in the Maldives. Amara arrived at the Okonkwo mansion with her Louis Vuitton luggage and a smile that could melt glaciers. She had practiced this moment. Every gesture, every word, every respectful bow. She knew that in Nigerian culture, winning over your mother-in-law wasn't just important, it was essential. "Mama, I brought you something special from our trip," she said, presenting a carefully wrapped package. Inside was an expensive silk wrapper and matching blouse. Mama Yetunde's eyes had filled with tears of joy. She had prayed for years that her son would find a good woman. Finally, her prayers seemed answered. For the first 3 weeks, everything seemed perfect. Amara would wake up early to help with breakfast. She'd ask Mama Yetunde to teach her how to make Adeleke's favorite dishes. She'd sit with the elderly woman in the evenings, listening to stories about Adeleke's childhood. But if you looked closely, if you paid attention to the moments when she thought no one was watching, you'd see something else. A tightness around her mouth, a coldness in her eyes, the mask of perfection already beginning to crack. The problem was that Adeleke worked constantly. Building an empire doesn't allow for much free time. And every moment he spent in business meetings, every hour he dedicated to his companies, Amara felt more and more invisible. But the real poison started when she realized something that would eventually consume her completely. Adeleke's mother wasn't just living in the house, she was living in his heart. And in Amara's twisted logic, there was only room for one woman there. It started small. So small that at first, everyone dismissed it as wedding stress or adjustment period challenges. Amara would make little comments here and there, nothing overtly cruel, just subtle digs disguised as concern. "Honey, don't you think your mother should rest more? She's always doing things around the house. People might think we don't take care of her." Adeleke has smiled, not catching the undertone. "Mama likes to stay active," he'd replied. "It makes her feel useful." Useful. That word ate at Amara like acid. Because in her mind, Mama Yetunde wasn't useful. She was competition. The staff noticed the changes first. The way Amara's voice would drop several degrees when speaking to them. The way she'd inspect their work with the scrutiny of a military general. The way she'd punish small mistakes with cutting remarks and threats of dismissal. Blessing, the youngest maid, bore the brunt of it. At 23, she was the same age Amara had been when she started working her way up in the corporate world. But where Blessing was humble and grateful for her job, Amara saw weakness, and weakness, in her eyes, deserved to be crushed. "Are you stupid?" she would hiss when Adeleke wasn't around. "Do I pay you to be lazy? My houseplants have more intelligence than you." The staff would clean faster, work harder, trying desperately to please a woman who could never be pleased. But Mama Yetunde saw everything. In her 72 years, she had witnessed all types of people. She recognized cruelty wearing the mask of perfectionism. She understood that Amara's harshness came from a place of deep pain. So she did what mothers do. She stayed quiet, kept the peace, and prayed that love would eventually soften the hardness in her daughter-in-law's heart. "God, please help her," she would whisper during her evening prayers. "Help her see that love doesn't divide. It multiplies. There's enough room in my son's heart for both of us." But some people don't want to share. Some people see love as a competition where there can only be one winner. 3 months into their marriage, Amara's true nature began to emerge like a shadow, growing longer as the sun sets. She started going through Mama Yetunde's room when the old woman was out visiting friends from church. What was she looking for? Evidence, she told herself. Proof that this old woman was manipulating her son, taking advantage of his generosity, hoarding family treasures that should rightfully belong to his wife now. She found gold jewelry that had been in the Okonkwo family for generations, land documents from the village where Adeleke was born, photo albums filled with memories from before Amara existed in his life. And each discovery fed her jealousy like gasoline on a fire. The dinner table became a battlefield. Adeleke would ask his mother about her day, and Amara would interrupt with stories about her own work achievements. Mama Yetunde would suggest a dish for the next meal, and Amara would immediately propose something different. Every interaction became a subtle competition for Adeleke's attention. And Adeleke, he was caught in the middle, trying to balance his love for his mother with his commitment to his wife. He'd been raised to respect elders, especially his mother, who had sacrificed everything to raise him after his father died. But he'd also taken vows to honor and cherish his wife. The argument started late at night, when Mama Yetunde was asleep. "Why do you always take her side?" Amara would demand. "I'm your wife, but you treat me like a guest in this house." Adeleke would hold her, confused by her tears. "Baby, there are no sides. You're both important to me." But that wasn't enough for Amara. She didn't want to be equally important. She wanted to be the only one who mattered. And slowly, methodically, she began working to make that happen. She started scheduling romantic dinners on the same nights Mama Yetunde had planned family gatherings. She'd book weekend getaways without checking if his mother needed anything. She'd monopolize his evenings with discussions about her work stress, leaving no time for him to check on his mother's health. And Mama Yetunde, she began to shrink, to take up less space, to speak more quietly, to need less, because she could feel herself becoming unwanted in the home her son had built for her. And that pain, that rejection, was worse than any physical wound. But here's what nobody understood yet. Amara's cruelty wasn't really about Mama Yetunde. It was about Amara herself, about the little girl who grew up feeling invisible in a family that favored her brothers, about the woman who had clawed her way to success but still felt empty inside. about someone so broken that she needed to break others to feel whole. The tragedy of hurt people is that they hurt people, and sometimes they hurt the most innocent among us. 4 months into the marriage, the household staff knew things that Adeleke didn't. They saw things that he couldn't see because he was away building his empire, trusting that his home was a sanctuary of love and respect. It was Ngozi, the cook who'd worked for the Okonkwo family for 15 years, who first noticed the missing items. Small things at first: a gold bracelet that Mama Yetunde always wore, an antique brooch that had belonged to Adeleke's grandmother, a set of silverware from the formal dining room. "I'm telling you, Blessing," Ngozi whispered one evening as they prepared dinner. "Madam is taking things. I've seen her with that leather bag, sneaking out on Thursday afternoons when Oga travels. And Mama's room, things are disappearing." They were right. Every Thursday, while Adeleke attended board meetings in Abuja, Amara would drive to a discreet jewelry shop in Lekki. She'd sell family heirlooms piece by piece, pocketing cash that she deposited in a private account her husband knew nothing about. But why? She had access to unlimited funds. Adeleke denied her nothing. The answer was simple and sad: control. She was building an escape fund. Because deep down, beneath all her manipulation and cruelty, Amara knew this couldn't last forever. She knew that eventually masks fall off, and when they do, you need a way out. When Mama Yetunde finally noticed her mother's brooch was gone, she said nothing. When her wedding band from her late husband disappeared, she stayed silent. She didn't want to cause trouble, didn't want to create conflict in her son's marriage. So she suffered in silence, the way so many elderly parents do, sacrificing their dignity to keep peace in the family. But Blessing saw. One afternoon, she walked into Mama Yetunde's room to deliver fresh linens and found the old woman crying silently, holding a photograph of her late husband. "Mama, what's wrong?" Blessing had asked, her young heart breaking at the sight. Mama Yetunde had wiped her tears quickly. "Nothing, my dear. Just old memories. Don't mind me." But Blessing knew, and knowing without being able to help is its own special kind of torture. By the 5th month, Amara had stopped pretending altogether. At least when Adeleke wasn't home. The mask she wore in public was still perfectly in place. But inside these walls, her true face emerged with terrifying clarity. She issued a new rule to the staff. "Mama wants to be independent," she announced in a morning meeting. "So unless she specifically asks for help, don't bother her. She finds it insulting." The staff exchanged worried glances, but said nothing. Jobs in Lagos were hard to find. So they watched as 72-year-old Mama Yetunde struggled to carry laundry baskets. They saw her climb stairs slowly, gripping the railing while their hands itched to help but couldn't. They heard her coughing at night from the dust she inhaled while cleaning her own room, a task that had always been done for her. And Adeleke? He noticed his mother seemed tired, but Amara was always ready with an explanation. "You know how Mama is, honey. So independent and stubborn. I keep offering to get her more help, but she insists on doing everything herself." Mama Yetunde would nod in agreement, not wanting to be the cause of marital strife. "Yes, my son, I'm fine. Just getting older. That's all." And Adeleke would kiss her forehead, unaware that he was witnessing the slow destruction of the woman who gave him life. But physical neglect was just the beginning. The verbal attacks started gradually, then crescendoed into something monstrous. At first, it was passive-aggressive comments. "Mama, you're moving so slowly today. I hope you're not becoming senile." Then it became more direct. "Why are you always in the way? This is a big house. Can't you stay in your room?" Each word was a small death. Each insult chipped away at a dignity that had taken 72 years to build. Mama Yetunde, who had raised her son to be respectful and kind, who had worked 3 jobs to send him to university, who had sacrificed everything for his success, was being reduced to nothing by the woman he had chosen to love. The rage attacks came next. One evening, Mama Yetunde accidentally knocked over a vase while dusting. It wasn't expensive, wasn't even special. But Amara erupted like a volcano that had been dormant for too long. "You stupid old woman. Can't you do anything right? That vase was a gift from my friends." She stood over Mama Yetunde as the elderly woman knelt to pick up the pieces, her hands shaking. "You're useless. Completely useless. I don't know why Adeleke insists on keeping you here." Mama Yetunde's hands trembled as she gathered the broken ceramic, each piece cutting into her weathered palms, but the physical cuts healed. The wounds Amara's words left in her heart would take much longer. The day everything fell apart started like any other. Adeleke left for Dubai at 4 in the morning for an important investor meeting. He kissed his sleeping wife goodbye, checked on his mother who was already awake and praying, and headed to the airport. "I'll be back in 3 days, Mama," he had said. "Take care of yourself." She had smiled, holding his hand. "Go with God, my son. Make us proud." Neither of them knew that by the time he returned, everything would have changed. When Amara woke up and confirmed her husband was truly gone, something inside her snapped. All the restraint she had maintained, all the careful control she had exercised when he was around, evaporated like morning mist under a harsh sun. Mama Yetunde was in the kitchen garden, tending to her small herb plot. It was one of the few joys she had left. Adeleke had set it up for her years ago, knowing how much she loved to grow things. She was humming an old gospel song, her weathered hands gentle with the basil plants. "What are you doing?" Amara's voice cut through the peaceful morning like a knife. Mama Yetunde looked up, startled. "Just watering my plants, my daughter. Would you like some fresh basil for the cook to use? Your plants? Your garden? Let me tell you something, old woman. Nothing in this house is yours. Not the garden, not your room, not even your son. He's mine now, and I'm tired of pretending you belong here." Mama Yetunde stood slowly, her knees protesting. "Amara, my dear, I don't understand. Have I done something to offend you?" The confusion in her voice was genuine. Despite everything, she still believed there could be peace between them. "Offend me? You offend me by breathing, by existing. Do you know what it's like to live in the shadow of a mother-in-law who's treated like a saint? To hear my mother says and my mother thinks every single day? You've stolen my husband's heart, and I hate you for it." The elderly woman backed away, suddenly afraid. She had faced many things in her life: poverty, widowhood, discrimination. But the naked hatred in her daughter-in-law's eyes was something new and terrifying. Amara followed her inside, her rage growing with each step. When they reached Mama Yetunde's room, the old woman tried to close the door, to create some barrier between herself and this storm of anger. But Amara pushed it open with such force that Mama Yetunde stumbled backward. "You think you're so important," Amara hissed, her voice low and venomous. The great Mama Yetunde, the perfect mother, the sacrificing saint. Well, let me tell you what you really are. You're a burden, an old, useless burden that I have to carry because my husband is too blind to see it. Tears filled Mama Yetunde's eyes, not from fear, but from heartbreak, because in that moment, she realized that all her patience, all her kindness, all her prayers had meant nothing. Some hearts are too hardened to soften. Some pain is too deep to heal. "Get out," Mama Yetunde said quietly, her voice shaking. "Please, just leave me alone." But Amara wasn't done. She pushed the old woman, not hard enough to seriously hurt her, but hard enough to send her stumbling against the bed frame. Blessing had been bringing fresh sheets and saw everything. Her heart hammered in her chest. Should she intervene? Should she scream for help? But fear paralyzed her. Fear of losing her job. Fear of Amara's wrath. Mama Yetunde tried to stand, but her old legs wouldn't cooperate. She fell again, this time hitting her head on the corner of the bedside table. The sound was sickening. The appearance of blood was immediate. And still, Amara didn't stop. Looking at the blood, at this elderly woman who had never done anything but love her son. Something demonic took over. She grabbed Mama Yetunde by her wrapper and pulled her up. The slap echoed through the room like a gunshot. Once, twice, 3 times. Each impact was the sound of humanity abandoning ship. Each blow was a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. "Please, don't hit me again." Mama Yetunde's voice was barely a whisper. Her face was wet with tears and blood. Her body was trembling. In her 72 years, she had never been struck by anyone, not even as a child. That's when Blessing ran to find help, ran to escape the horror she had witnessed, ran because she knew that silence was no longer an option. Some things are too evil to ignore. Some crimes against humanity demand action. Amara stood there, breathing hard, looking down at what she had done. For just a moment, a flicker of horror crossed her face, but then she hardened again. "Clean yourself up," she said coldly. "And if you tell Adeleke about this, I'll make sure he sends you to a nursing home. Is that what you want?" Mama Yetunde lay on the floor of her room, bleeding, broken, and alone. The woman who had given everything had been reduced to nothing by someone who valued nothing but herself. They say that heaven keeps records of every tear shed, every blow struck, every cruelty inflicted. And on that day, the angels wept. 3,000 miles away in Dubai, Adeleke sat in a conference room filled with investors when he felt it. A cold dread that started in his chest and spread through his entire body. Something was wrong at home. He couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it. But he knew. "Gentlemen, I apologize, but I need to cut this short," he said, standing abruptly. His investors looked at him in surprise. Adeleke Okonkwo never left meetings early, never put personal matters above business. But some things are more important than money. During the 7-hour flight back to Lagos, he tried calling home repeatedly. Amara's phone went straight to voicemail. The house phone rang unanswered. Even the staff phones were silent. The dread in his chest grew into full-blown panic. His driver met him at the private terminal and immediately saw something was wrong. "Sir, we need to hurry," was all he said. But it was enough. Adeleke's blood ran cold. When they pulled through the gates, Blessing was already running toward the car, her face streaked with tears, her uniform disheveled. She didn't need to say anything. The terror in her eyes told the entire story. Adeleke didn't remember getting out of the car, didn't remember dropping his briefcase on the driveway, didn't remember loosening his tie as he ran. All he knew was that every second felt like an eternity, and whatever waited inside those doors would change his life forever. The house that had always felt like a sanctuary now felt like a tomb, too quiet, too still, the kind of silence that comes after something terrible has happened. He followed the sound of quiet sweeping, down the West Wing corridor, past the family portraits on the wall, past the photographs of happier times, until he reached his mother's door. And then he saw it. His mother, the woman who had worked 3 jobs to send him to school, the woman who had sold her wedding ring to pay for his first laptop, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. She lay crumpled on the Persian rug, blood matting her grey hair, her face swollen, her spirit broken, and standing over her, breathing hard, still trembling with rage, was his wife, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, the woman he had trusted with his family, his home, his heart. The sound of his briefcase hitting the floor echoed like a judge's gavel. Final, irreversible, the death of innocence, the end of one chapter and the violent beginning of another. Amara's face transformed instantly. The mask snapped back into place with desperate speed. Her voice changed from cold fury to panicked sweetness in a heartbeat. "Honey! Oh, thank God you're home. Your mother, she fell, and I was trying to help her. But Adeleke held up one hand, just one gesture, and the silence that followed was more powerful than any words. Because in that silence lived the death of trust, the destruction of love, and the birth of a truth that could no longer be denied. Everyone in that room held their breath. Blessing, watching from the doorway, Ngozi, who had rushed upstairs at the commotion. Even Amara, who had never seen this expression on her husband's face before. They all expected an explosion. Screaming, violence meeting violence. The kind of rage that breaks furniture and bones. But Adeleke simply walked past his wife as if she didn't exist and knelt beside his mother. His hands, which had signed million-dollar deals and built an empire, now trembled as they gently touched his mother's face. "Mama," he whispered. Just that one word, but it contained oceans of love, mountains of sorrow, and a grief so profound it seemed to fill the entire room. Mama Yetunde opened her swollen eyes and tried to smile. Even then, even broken and bleeding and humiliated, she tried to comfort her son. "I'm okay, my child. Don't worry. I just fell." The lie hurt more than the truth would have, because it meant his mother was still trying to protect him, still trying to keep peace in his marriage, still sacrificing herself for his happiness. He lifted her as gently as if she were made of glass. This woman who had carried him for 9 months, who had carried the weight of his childhood on her shoulders, who had carried the burden of his dreams. Now, he carried her. "Adeleke, please, let me explain." Amara started, reaching out to touch his arm. The look he gave her stopped her mid-sentence. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was something far more devastating. It was disappointment. Complete and total disappointment. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes before a storm, or after everything that matters has already been destroyed. Don't, he said simply. Don't say another word. He carried his mother out of that room, down the stairs, and placed her gently in his car. He didn't shout, didn't break things, didn't give Amara the reaction she might have expected, or perhaps even wanted. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to violence isn't more violence. It's the complete withdrawal of everything that person values most. At the hospital, as doctors examined his mother and nurses cleaned her wounds, Adeleke sat in the waiting room with his head in his hands. And for the first time since he was a child, since the day his father died, he wept. The doctors gave him the full report: contusions, a mild concussion, bruises that would take weeks to fade. But the psychological trauma, they warned, would take much longer to heal. Abuse of the elderly leaves scars that go deeper than skin. Through the window of her private room, he watched his mother sleep, finally at peace for the first time in months. And he made a decision, not out of anger or revenge, but out of love. Out of the understanding that sometimes protecting someone means making the hardest choices of your life. The next morning, while his mother rested in the hospital under the care of the best nurses money could buy, Adeleke made several phone calls to his lawyer, to his accountant, to a therapist who specialized in elder abuse, and finally to Amara. She had spent the night in that big mansion, alone, pacing the floors, rehearsing explanations and excuses. She had convinced herself she could talk her way out of this, that she could make him understand, that love would conquer all. But when he spoke, his words shattered every delusion she had built. Amara, I'm not going to shout. I'm not going to accuse you. I'm simply going to tell you what happens next. You have 24 hours to pack your personal belongings. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce proceedings. Adeleke, please, you don't understand. She started, tears streaming down her face now. Real tears, perhaps. Or perhaps just the tears of someone realizing they've lost everything they wanted. You're right, I don't understand. I don't understand how someone I loved could hurt the person who gave me life. I don't understand cruelty disguised as perfectionism. I don't understand jealousy so consuming it would rather destroy than share. And I don't need to understand. Because understanding doesn't change what you did. She begged, pleaded, made promises of change and therapy and becoming better. But some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some trust, once shattered, can never be whole again. 3 days later, Adeleke called a press conference. The media expected him to expose his wife publicly, to shame her, to seek the kind of revenge that would satisfy the crowd's hunger for justice. But Adeleke understood something most people don't. Public humiliation doesn't heal wounds. Revenge doesn't restore dignity. And hatred, no matter how justified, only creates more hatred. I'm here today to announce the establishment of the Mama Yetunde Foundation, he began, his voice steady, despite the emotion clearly visible in his eyes. A foundation dedicated to supporting victims of elder abuse across Nigeria and, eventually, across Africa. The reporters stared, confused. Where was the scandal? Where was the public accusation? Where was the drama they had been expecting? Too many elderly parents suffer in silence. He continued. They endure abuse from the people they trusted most because they don't want to cause trouble. Because they love their families more than they love their own safety. This ends today. We will provide shelter, legal support, medical care, and counseling to any elderly person experiencing abuse. From her hospital bed, Mama Yetunde watched her son speak. And for the first time since that terrible day, she smiled. Because her suffering had not been meaningless, her pain had sparked a movement. Her silence had finally found a voice. Within hours, the foundation's website crashed from traffic. Donations poured in from around the world. Survivors of elder abuse shared their stories. The conversation Adeleke started rippled outward like waves from a stone thrown into still water. He could have chosen revenge. He could have destroyed Amara publicly. But instead, he chose to build something that would outlast his pain. He chose to turn his family's tragedy into hope for thousands of others. And that choice taught everyone watching a lesson they would never forget. Amara moved into an expensive apartment in Ikoyi. Adeleke had been more than fair in the divorce settlement. She had money, property, a car, everything except what she actually wanted: status, respect, and the identity that came from being Mrs. Okonkwo. The friends who had celebrated her wedding ghosted her calls. The social circles that had welcomed her closed their doors. In Lagos's elite society, news travels faster than lightning. Everyone knew what she had done, even if the details were scarce. Adeleke hadn't given interviews or named her publicly, but silence can speak louder than accusations. Every day, she watched the Mama Yetunde Foundation grow. Every day, she saw Adeleke's face in news articles about elder care reform. Every day, she was confronted with the stark reality of what she had lost and why she had lost it. The panic attacks started in the third week. She would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, seeing Mama Yetunde's bleeding face in her nightmares. The luxury apartment felt like a prison. The silence felt like judgment. She finally sought help. Dr. Obi, a trauma therapist who specialized in anger management and childhood wounds. In that office, with no one to impress and nowhere to hide, Amara finally faced herself. I was invisible growing up, she confessed through tears. My brothers got everything: attention, praise, love. I had to fight for every scrap of recognition. I told myself that when I finally made it, when I finally got someone successful to love me, I would never share him, never be second place again. The therapist listened without judgment. So when Adeleke loved his mother, you saw it as choosing her over you. You saw love as a competition instead of an abundance. I destroyed everything, Amara whispered. I hurt an innocent woman because of wounds from my own childhood. And now I have to live with that forever. Understanding why you did something doesn't excuse what you did, but it's the first step toward real change. And Amara was beginning to understand that she had two choices. Let her guilt destroy her, or let it transform her. 6 months passed. Mama Yetunde had fully recovered physically and moved into a beautiful cottage on Adeleke's estate property, surrounded by gardens and peace. The foundation was thriving, helping hundreds of elderly victims find safety and justice. And Amara? She had become a ghost in her own life. She volunteered anonymously at an elder care facility in Surulere, far from her old neighborhood. She wore simple clothes, covered her designer handbags, and walked quietly in the background. At first, she could barely look at the elderly residents without seeing Mama Yetunde's face. Without hearing those words, "Please, don't hit me again." But slowly, through service, through listening to their stories, through seeing their humanity, something in her began to crack open. There was Mama Aduke, 80 years old, who had been beaten by her own daughter. Mama Chioma, 75, whose son's wife had stolen her pension. Papa Ibrahim, 82, whose caregiver had left him in his own waste for days. Each story was a mirror reflecting her own sins. One day, after helping Mama Aduke bathe her bruised arms, Amara locked herself in a supply closet and wept. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of genuine remorse. The kind of crying that comes from truly seeing the pain you've caused and knowing you can never take it back. That night, she wrote a letter, not to ask for forgiveness, because she knew she didn't deserve it, not to explain herself, because there was no excuse, but simply to say, "I see what I did. I carry it every day, and I'm spending the rest of my life trying to be better than the person who hurt you." She didn't sign it, didn't include a return address, just sent it through a courier and prayed that somehow, some way, it might bring a fraction of the peace she had stolen. When Mama Yetunde read those words, she knew immediately who had written them. And she did something that most people wouldn't understand. She prayed for Amara. Not because Amara deserved it, but because Mama Yetunde understood something profound about the nature of forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't saying what they did was okay, she would later say in a foundation interview. It's refusing to let their actions poison your heart. It's understanding that hate destroys the vessel that carries it. I choose peace, not for her, for me. 8 months after that terrible day, fate orchestrated an accidental meeting. Adeleke stopped at a small grocery store in Lekki, far from his usual haunts, looking for a specific type of tea his mother loved. Amara was there buying supplies for the shelter. Their eyes met across the produce aisle. For a moment, neither moved. The last time they had seen each other was in divorce court, sitting on opposite sides of a room that felt as wide as an ocean. Amara's first instinct was to run, to hide, to avoid the judgment she knew she deserved. But something had changed in her. 8 months of therapy, of service, of facing her demons had given her a different kind of strength. She walked toward him slowly, her hands trembling. "Adeleke," she said quietly, "I know I have no right to speak to you, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. What I did to your mother, there's no excuse, no explanation that makes it okay." Adeleke looked at her, really looked at her. The designer clothes were gone. The perfect makeup was gone. The mask she had worn so carefully was gone. What remained was just a broken human being trying to piece herself back together. "I heard you've been volunteering," he said finally. "At the shelter in Surulere. They don't know who you are, do they?" She shook her head. "No, and they don't need to. I'm not doing it for recognition. I'm doing it because I need to try to balance the scales, even though I know I never can." They stood in that aisle for what felt like hours, but was only minutes. Two people who had once promised forever, now strangers, bound only by the memory of pain. "You didn't destroy me, Amara," Adeleke said softly. "You revealed who I truly am. You showed me that wealth without character is worthless, that success without compassion is hollow. In the worst possible way, you taught me what matters most." "How is she?" Amara whispered. "Your mother?" Adeleke's face softened slightly. "She's healing. She's found peace. She even prays for you." That truth hit harder than any accusation could have. To know that the woman she had brutalized was praying for her salvation. That was the kind of grace that breaks you open and rebuilds you from the inside out. They parted ways without another word. Some encounters don't need long conversations. Sometimes, just seeing that the other person is trying to be better is enough. 1 year after that terrible day, the Mama Yetunde Foundation had become a movement. What started as one man's response to personal tragedy had blossomed into a nationwide conversation about elder care, family responsibility, and the silent epidemic of abuse happening behind closed doors. They had opened 5 shelters across Nigeria, provided legal representation to over 200 elderly victims, trained social workers in every major city to recognize signs of elder abuse, created a 24-hour hotline that received thousands of calls monthly. But more than the numbers, more than the buildings and the services, the foundation had given voice to the voiceless. Elderly parents who had suffered in silence for years were finally speaking up. Children who had witnessed abuse were finally reporting it. Society was finally acknowledging that respect for elders wasn't just tradition. It was a moral imperative. Mama Yetunde herself had become an unlikely advocate. At 73, she traveled to schools, churches, and community centers, sharing her story. Not with bitterness or anger, but with wisdom and grace that moved everyone who heard her. "I share my story, not to shame anyone," she would say, her voice strong despite her small stature, but to help others understand that abuse can happen anywhere, in poor homes and rich homes, to educated people and uneducated people. It's not about money or status. It's about power and control and unhealed wounds. And when she finished speaking, the standing ovations weren't just for her courage. They were for every grandmother, every grandfather, every elderly parent who had ever felt invisible, unwanted, or unsafe in their own family. Adeleke would watch from backstage, his eyes glistening with tears of pride. This woman who had been broken had become a beacon. Her suffering had been transformed into purpose. And that transformation was perhaps the greatest success of his life. 2 years after the incident, Amara had stopped hiding. She had revealed her identity to the shelter staff and residents, expecting rejection and hatred. Instead, she found something unexpected: the possibility of redemption through honest service. She had become certified as a counselor, specializing in anger management and family violence. She led support groups for people who had abused their family members and were trying to change. Not everyone could face what she had done and choose differently, but those who could found in her a guide who understood their darkness because she had lived in it. "You give me hope," one woman told her after a session. "If you can change, if you can face what you did and become better, then maybe I can too." Amara held her hand, remembering when she had been the one needing that hope. On the second anniversary of that day, Amara did something she never thought she'd have the courage to do. She went to Mama Yetunde's cottage, not to ask for forgiveness, not to ease her guilt, but simply to look the woman she had hurt in the eyes and say, "I see you. I see your humanity that I refused to see before, and I'm sorry." Mama Yetunde opened the door and looked at the woman who had once been her nightmare. And what she saw was different from before. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. What remained was a human being genuinely trying to atone. "Come," Mama Yetunde said simply, taking Amara's hand. "Let me make us tea." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't even full forgiveness yet. But it was the beginning of something rare and precious. The possibility that even our worst mistakes don't have to define us forever. 3 years after that terrible day, the ripples of one family's crisis had become waves of change. Adeleke's foundation had expanded to 6 African countries. Mama Yetunde had written a book about forgiveness that became a bestseller. Amara had helped hundreds of people confront their capacity for cruelty and choose differently. Adeleke had found love again, this time with a woman who understood that his mother wasn't competition but a blessing. A woman who saw Mama Yetunde as the remarkable person she was and felt privileged to know her. And on the foundation's 3rd anniversary, all 3 of them were there. Adeleke giving the keynote speech, Mama Yetunde being honored for her advocacy, and Amara standing in the back row, clapping along with everyone else, no longer hiding but no longer seeking the spotlight. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, a nod of acknowledgement, not friendship, because some wounds are too deep for that. Not forgetting, because that would dishonor the pain, but recognition of something profound, that human beings are capable of terrible cruelty and remarkable redemption, often within the same lifetime. This story doesn't have a fairy tale ending, because real life rarely does. The scars remain. The memories don't fade. The pain that was inflicted can't be erased. But something else happened. Something that matters just as much as the tragedy itself. One man chose dignity over destruction. One mother chose grace over bitterness. One broken woman chose transformation over giving up. And thousands of people who were suffering in silence found their voices. That's the real story, not the violence, not the betrayal, but what happened after. The choice that Adeleke made when he saw his mother bleeding. He could have chosen revenge. Instead, he chose to build something that would outlast his pain. Right now, as you listen to this story, there are elderly parents suffering in silence, being abused by the children they raised, the families they sacrificed for. They stay quiet because they love their families more than they love their safety, because they don't want to cause trouble, because they believe they have nowhere to go. But Mama Yetunde's story teaches us that silence isn't peace, that enabling abuse isn't love, that true family protects its most vulnerable members, not sacrifices them for comfort. The world saw a man who had everything and chose dignity over destruction, a mother who had every right to hate but chose peace instead, and a woman who had fallen to her darkest depths but chose to climb back toward the light. Their story teaches us that we always have choices, even in our worst moments, even when we've been hurt, even when we've hurt others. The question is, what will you choose? If you or someone you know is experiencing elder abuse, help is available. You don't have to suffer in silence. And if you've hurt someone you love, it's never too late to choose differently. Redemption is possible, but it starts with one choice, one moment, one decision to be better than you were yesterday. This is a story that needed to be told, not to shame anyone, but to shine light on a darkness too many people face. If this story moved you, share it, because somewhere out there, Someone needs to hear that they're not alone, that there's hope, that change is possible. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in a delicate position, what would you have done? Would you have chosen revenge or redemption? Would you have forgiven or forgotten? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe that every parent, every elderly person, every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, hit that subscribe button. Because we need more stories that inspire us to be better. More conversations that challenge us to choose compassion over cruelty. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for caring about stories that matter. And remember, true strength isn't in revenge. It's in restraint. It's in choosing to build rather than destroy. It's in understanding that the best response to darkness is to become a light for others. Go with peace. And if you have elderly parents or relatives, call them today. Tell them you love them. Make sure they know they are valued. Because time is precious and love should never wait.